What is a fractional CTO? Or most importantly, who is a fractional CTO? Can anyone become one? Or do you need a certain seniority, a certain career, and exposure to different experiences? Today, I am thrilled to welcome Eric Hunsberger, a seasoned tech leader who has recently embraced the dynamic and impactful role of a fractional CTO. With a rich career spanning various leadership positions in technology, Eric brings a unique perspective on navigating the evolving demands of modern businesses while empowering teams to achieve their potential. In this episode, we'll dive into Eric's journey, what inspires his transition to a fractional role, the defining moments that shaped his leadership style, and how his diverse experiences inform his approach today. We'll also explore the unique value a fractional CTO brings to an organization, the challenges of leading in a non-traditional capacity, and his advice for tech professionals aspiring to follow a similar path. Plus, we'll get a glimpse into the human side of leadership as Eric shares what keeps him energized when he's not working. Eric, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you having me on. I'm excited for this conversation and talk about this. So thank you very much.
Eric, what inspired you to transition into a fractional CTO role, and how did you prepare for this shift?
Yeah, this may sound a little bit different, but I started to think about kind of what does retirement look like, right? So I'm somebody who I tend to think into the future and then kind of come back to where I am today. And so I really started to think about like, what does that retirement or non-retirement look like, right? As I get older, and the idea of board members, board seats, right? Those things kind of came into my mind of what that might look like. And then I started to walk back towards present day and think about like, how am I going to get there, right? I mean, I have experience in a number of industries. I've been in different organizations of different sizes, right? I've done different technology things. But how do I actually build like that portfolio style career, right? And so that was kind of the initial thought of what am I going to do with the rest of my life when I grow up, right? And so then I started to network with folks, chat with people, and kind of understand how are other people getting into those types of positions later in their careers. And somebody mentioned fractional to me. They said, have you thought about fractional? Have you heard of fractional? And my answer was no, I have not. So I did some research on that, and it really started to resonate with what I wanted to do, right? It was helping companies, helping multiple companies, right? It was taking my experience. It was an interesting style of work. I think you've seen this too with people that you've talked to over the past 18 months. It's been a rough job market, right? People are they're getting laid off, they're having a hard time finding jobs. And so I think that was part of it as well, was just how do I start to begin to think about resiliency in my career a little bit? And it just became very appealing to step into that fractional world. And so that's what led me to like discover what fractional was. At least in terms of as a concept, how it would fit in my career, right? And then moving forward from there.
Amazing. And let's go back even a little bit. How did your background in tech led you to become a leader, and what were some defining moments along the way, right? Prior to making this decision, you were evolving and becoming more a leader in the true sense of it.
Yeah, if I think back far enough, right? Not to call myself old, but if I think back far enough, the pursuit of challenge, I think is what started to get me interested in leadership, right? From a technology perspective, there's so many things that you can solve, and technology has a number of challenges, right? But I was interested in helping other teams, helping other people embrace technology, leverage it. And that just kind of naturally, through my progression as an engineer and an architect, led me towards leading teams. And when I was at Bluestem, one of the companies I was at, that was the big transition into leadership. Was as an engineer architect, we were creating these systems and these microservices kind of around an ERP implementation. And we began to break the infrastructure a little bit. Couldn't go fast enough, couldn't deploy fast enough. And so I had the opportunity to go work with the infrastructure teams on solving that problem, right? How do we begin to scale? How do we begin to build servers faster? Do it in 3 minutes instead of 3 weeks or 30 days or whatever it might be. and bringing those software engineering disciplines into the infrastructure side, like that was really energizing, right? Being able to think differently about infrastructure, helping lead teams through that, adopting DevOps. So I think that my background in software engineering helped me be a leader in infrastructure engineering just because I thought about it a little bit differently. So that was one of the defining moments, I would say, is having that opportunity where your boss comes to you and says, "Hey, you should go fix infrastructure. Go work in that space." And you've never been in that space before. And so I think that was a big moment for just broadening my career, right? And broadening my exposure.
So there's a lot of leading the way, a lot of curiosity, a lot of embracing and seeking challenges, a lot of growth mindset. Is that how will you describe your leadership style, and how did your leadership style evolve in your career as you started leading bigger and bigger teams?
Yeah, I would say my leadership style, definitely embracing curiosity, empowering teams, right? I mean, at the end of the day, you want to create these autonomous teams that are able to go and solve interesting problems. And to do that, you have to give people interesting problems, right? When you move from individual contributor engineer into a leadership style role, you have to step away from the details. You have to trust your team. You have to empower your team, get the roadblocks out of their way. And I think part of that too is also giving people something to own, right? That is something that happened to me early in my career. And I know other colleagues that I have, they have a very similar story. You give somebody something to own, like own it from tip to tail, take that thing from inception all the way into an implementation. And that, I think, helps really just embolden people. They can own the problem, they can make decisions, they can be curious about it, they come up with different solutions, right? And that, I think, that's where you get into, in my opinion, really good leadership, right? Because now the teams, they're bringing ideas to the table, saying, "Hey, we want to go do this now. We want to go do that now," right? And that's, you would probably agree with this, being leader of your organization, right? That's what you want. You want people to be self-starting, autonomous, empowered, right? A little bit of guardrails. Don't get too crazy, just because we have an organization to keep running. But for me, that is my leadership approach, and I think that reflects leaders in the past that I've had too that give me those opportunities.
Was it ever scary to you to empower teams and to give them something to own and to give them that freedom? It sounds very natural, but when you were getting started, was there a point in time where you were like, "Oh, I know this in and out. I know I can do it. So I don't know if I want to delegate it, the whole thing to my team," or did it become like a natural thing to you? Like, I had great bosses that were like that with me and gave me great challenges. I'm going to just do that with my team.
I think because my true leadership kind of development started in the infrastructure space, it was a little bit scary for me, right? Because I hadn't run infrastructure before, and I hadn't necessarily, I've caused outages from software decisions that I made, right? But I haven't ever been responsible necessarily for the infrastructure of an organization. And so it was a little bit scary in terms of, well, what if it doesn't go well? There's going to be this outcome. There's going to be this reaction to that. That ended up being a very good lesson for me as a leader in terms of how to manage expectations with C-level people, with business partners, right? How do you begin to have these conversations about, hey, we're going to go do this, we're going to try this, we're going to take this risk, this iteration, this whatever it is, and there could be some unintended consequences, but we will solve those. We will deal with those as they come up. And that also taught me how to do iterative changes. How do I start to make smaller changes that have a smaller kind of blast radius, I guess, for lack of a better phrase. And that builds confidence with your business partners then. And so I think that being a leader and having that mindset and having that experience and being able to manage expectations, that becomes the roadblocking you do for your teams, right? Because at the end of the day, everyone's human. And as much as computers are ones and zeros, things go wrong. They aren't necessarily predictable. And you just have to be able to accept that, understand that, roll with it. And that's where the guardrails come in, right? Like, let's not make it huge. Let's not change out the entire storage array day before Christmas, right? But let's make a small change and prove that we can do these things. And that's how you begin to get like continuous deployment. And you kind of begin to get rid of these like hard freezes and things like that.
Amazing. What do you enjoy the most about being in leadership positions, right? How many years have you been in leadership positions? Just for the sake of the audience understanding what we're talking about.
Yeah, I think formally for, I don't know, 12, 15 years maybe, and informally 5 to 6 to 7 before that.
So a lot. Now looking back, putting all of that, under perspective, what do you enjoy the most? What was the most rewarding part of it, or is?
Yeah. It's seeing people grow, seeing them get excited, seeing them be curious, seeing them solve problems that people didn't think were solvable. Seeing that excitement, right? I mean, it's as hard as like seeing a person leave a company. Like sometimes that's a very exciting thing because they've grown to the point where they've outgrown you, and
Yeah,
like I have to go.
yeah.
Well, you should go, right? You should go get that experience. So for me, that's where all the energy comes from. It's seeing people open up and discover things and learn things and solve problems and then begin to help other people solve problems, right? Because they get excited about it. And so that's been the most gratifying thing for me over the years.
Do you stay in touch with some of those people that outgrown their role and moved on, and you've seen them like flourish?
Yeah, absolutely. I try to anyway, right? I mean, everyone gets busy, but yeah, I mean, it's great to see. And I think LinkedIn does a really good job of just
Yeah.
helping a little bit of that. It gives you those little sparks to reach out and be like, hey, like I saw you switch companies and you're over here now and you're doing this. Like that's great. You see some people that you worked with before and they flip like you did from engineering and infrastructure, they go into security. I think yeah, I mean, I do love seeing that. I love keeping in contact with them and understanding where they're headed, and it's also like you get to learn, right? That's one of the great things about keeping in touch with people who've outgrown the organization you're in is you get to learn what they're doing, and that's informative too. So yeah, then now that you're asking me that question, I'm thinking about it. I should probably reach out a little more often, but yeah, it is great to see that.
Yeah, and like you said, it's hard, right? Because you had a respectable long career and you keep adding up, right? And it's a lot of people, right? And sometimes you just, but yeah, like you, I always think about that and try to stay more in touch with some of those people. And
Yeah.
I agree with you. It's the most rewarding aspect of leadership for sure. Let's go back to fractional CDO, right? What unique value does a fractional CDO bring to an organization when you compare that to a full-time executive? How will you talk about that?
Yeah, I think, well, from a unique value perspective, um, I think fractional CTOs and folks like myself that have been across a number of different industries and a number of different kind of technology stacks, we're not necessarily scared of technology, right? Um, Everything has a pattern, in my opinion, anyway. Patterns exist and you can apply those between industries. So I think that's one of the values you get from people who decide to go down that fractional path and they have that breadth of experiences. They can then apply different scenarios that you maybe hadn't thought of in your business, right? And it isn't that full-time executives that have that breadth of experience can't do that either. But as a fractional, you're more incentivized to, right? I think just come in and say, hey, let's think about this differently. You're incentivized also to go faster, right? That's one of the things that people look for when they hire somebody fractionally. They expect you to be able to do work quick, right? And bring all that experience. That's the whole point. And then I think another value that organizations get from it, or the differentiator, is you're able to tap into talent that you maybe couldn't afford necessarily, right? So if you want to hire a CIO or a CTO, but you really don't have the budget to do it, like fractional is a great way to get some of that expertise. And then you can even grow team members into the role, right, internally. So I'm bleeding off of your question a little bit, but I think that fractional CTOs bring, like those are the benefits that we bring, right, to an organization.
No, I love it because you are not, you've been around, you've seen things, you are not scared, you can identify the patterns, right? You can come in at a lower cost, but with a greater experience. You can see patterns across industries and leverage that. And another thing is you can leverage an amazing network of people that you know, right? And
Right.
even talent. If you want to attract talent, you've been around long enough and you work with people long enough that it's probably easier to you to tap into the best talent that you need for each situation, correct?
Yeah, that's a great point. That's another differentiator that I think is worth talking about. To be fractional, right, you have to develop these partnerships because you're a single person, so you can't do everything. And to your point, you have to have partnerships where, as you identify a certain problem or a thing to go tackle, right, or you reach an edge of a domain that you're just not comfortable in necessarily, leveraging those partnerships to bring in other people to help solve that problem. And that's the same lower barrier to commit for the organization as the fractional person is, right? Because it's bringing people in to solve a problem, and it's a short-term commitment, right? And then off you go. So yeah, I think that's definitely a big differentiator. And that's thinking about how I got to where I am fractionally. Like, part of my exploration into why would companies hire? Why wouldn't they? Right. Part of that was also, who are partners that can help me? When I do get into a situation where someone's like, Eric, can you fix this? The answer is no. However, no, or yes, and. Yeah, right. So it's definitely a benefit. Yeah.
Let's go back a little bit to the pattern identification and to your various professional experiences and how those inform your approach as a fractional CDO. Can you tell me more about that? When someone comes in with a problem, most of the times it's not the first you are seeing this problem. It's maybe you saw it in a different capacity, in a different place, in a different industry, but same or similar problem.
Yeah, one example, a recent one I would have is in the data space. So the patterns of doing data analytics and reporting, companies oftentimes, we all like to think we're unique, right? In terms of the way that our business model is and the way that our organization is. But when you start to think about analytics and reporting, and you think about kind of the current trend or approach to architecture is to do these data domains and these data products, and you begin to organize things into that, like, that's a pattern, right? It's a pattern of organization. And it doesn't matter if you're an insurance provider, if you're a retailer, if you're a manufacturer, you will have data domains, you will have data products. It's just a matter of mapping your nomenclature, right? And into like what that actual implementation looks like. And so, and like I said, I've had a number of conversations recently about this. I think that's a great example of being able to take a data analytics pattern and apply it to pretty much any industry, right? Say, okay, here's how we're going to organize it. Here's what it looks like. Here's what the governance framework looks like. And the people you plug into this pattern and the data you plug into that is different, but the pattern still holds. And that's one of the things that I love about technology. That's when you talk to software engineering leaders, right? And full stack engineers, and they say, well, it's just code. It doesn't matter what language I'm writing in. I think they're applying the same pattern concept. We're going to solve a problem. We're just going to use a different language to do it.
It's amazing. And I was just wondering about how us as humans, it's like a magical thing going on when we start recognizing patterns, right? And now with AI and everything, it's all about pattern recognition as well. It's just, that in a completely different way, but it's what you're doing, right? You just have so much information in your head, and you are recognizing from your history, from your experience, different patterns, and applying solutions, maybe in a more magic and creative or artistic way. I like to think as a human.
I like to think so too, right? I mean, I take that same pattern approach, and I think about it just in life in general, right? I mean, that's sometimes I post about baking, and I relate baking to technology, because I think that, like, the pattern of troubleshooting applies. You're trying to bake something that doesn't work. You're like, well, that's not good. Got to go figure that out, right? Instead of throwing it away. I mean, that pattern of troubleshooting, right? That pattern of problem solving. Yeah, so I agree. Like, I probably take it to an extreme of, like, everything has to be a pattern sometimes, right?
I
But
see
yeah,
patterns everywhere.
that's right. Exactly. Like, you got the numbers floating in front of your face, right? Yeah.
Um, Let me ask you this. Is there an ideal time or age to consider becoming a fractional tech leader, or does it depend on the individual's journey?
That's a good question. I think, of course, it depends. That's always the answer, right? For everything, it depends. I do think that there's benefit to having experience that you can pull upon, right? I do think I wouldn't suggest coming right out of college and becoming fractional, right? Because I don't think you have that experience to pull from. I think it depends on what kind of a fractional you want to be. Do you want to be somebody who's in that fractional advisory capacity in a certain domain within a certain industry? That kind of gets a little bit more towards consulting, but the concepts apply, right? Do you want to be fractional at a C level? And do you want to be just in manufacturing in general? So it really depends, I think, on what somebody wants to be, what their focus is going to be, right, to begin. Because and the reason I say that is part of embracing or embarking on a fractional journey, people will immediately try to find out, what are you focused on? I get the question all the time. What industry are you in? What's your niche, right? And it's a little bit different when I come back and I say, well, industry doesn't really matter, because I'm technology, right? And technology is ones and zeros, and patterns like we just talked about apply. And so I think that technology fractionals are a little bit different than like marketing fractionals, right? So it really just, it depends. But I would definitely say get a decade of experience, right?
Right.
And take that experience then and figure out what energizes you, what do you want to do, turn that into your fractional practice, and then go for it.
Yeah. What are the biggest challenges of being a technology leader, particularly in a fractional capacity?
I think it's because you're working with different companies and because you have to move fast. I think some of the challenges are, how do you get up to speed quickly on the business? What are the business strategies? What are the priorities? Who are the team members, right? Because you have, like any organization, when you start, you have to figure out, like, who is everybody? And they all want to know, who are you and why are you here? And so I think those challenges are getting that clarity as quick as you can, and being able to then help drive impact as quick as you can too, right? Like begin to actually show value, make progress. So those things I think are, to me, they're challenges. I feel like it's a little bit easier in some cases than when you're an actual full-time employee, just because you are fractional, you are kind of a consultant, right? And so there's just, I think in people's minds, there's less politics around it, I guess, right? So that kind of makes it a little bit easier, I think, to get in and build those relationships. But definitely, and part of that too, when I talk about getting like understanding the business, right, and how to help and add value, I believe that as a fractional, that doesn't begin on day one, right? That began 3 months ago when you started talking with the organization about what they needed, what their challenges were. So I think that's one of the things that you have to do too fractionally, is you really need to understand, what are we trying to solve? Are you the right fit for the organization, or somebody else potentially, right? Like that can help make that transition a lot easier, in my opinion.
And that's a great segue to my next question, in terms of the key difference that you've noticed working with multiple companies as a consultant versus a traditional CTO role, right? And you said something about, getting up to speed quickly, and that's needed because you're jumping from one thing to the other, and you have many things right on your plate. But there are less politics, maybe, or you get to ask more questions freely because that's your role. Can you expand more on that? How do you see the differences and manage through those differences?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, well, one, I mean, as a fractional, like there's no reason to not be transparent, right? And I talk to organizations about that too. Like, I'll bring the highest transparency I can, right? Like when you engage in a fractional relationship with an organization, typically, if you talk to other folks in the industry, like typically that's a 30-day kind of a 30-day notice on either side to say, all right, we're good, and move on, right? So when you're a full-time employee, it's different, right? Like you've now signed on, you have almost like this hesitation, I guess, if you will, to be transparent when you see things, right? And so I think, to me, that's a big difference, right? And I think it's a powerful one too, right? As a fractional, you come in and you're just like, well, this is what it is. Like, this is it. It's transparent. This is where we're headed. This is where we're going to go. This is what I think we should do. And if the organization doesn't like it, I mean, it's kind of this conversation of like, well, are we a good fit then or not? Because that's, like, you think you want to go to the cloud, for example, but if we come in and we talk about it and talk about all the things where you're not ready, and then you decide you don't want to go to the cloud, that's okay. Then we can end our time, right? Like, you didn't hire a full-time person then, and then come to that same conclusion, and then you have to go let them go, right? So that's the way that I think about it anyway, that's the way I think about that.
Now, for the audience, for tech professionals that are considering a fractional role, What advice will you give them to help them succeed in this unique leadership path?
Yeah, definitely. Networking is huge, right? In terms of how you find clients, how you find potential partners, how you help others in the industry, right? Because like through networking, through helping, through giving, that's kind of how you begin to kind of create this ecosystem of folks who are all trying to help each other. I think that's the first one. The second one is if you're really interested in fractional, like don't wait. Don't wait until you get laid off, right? Because what happens is when you get laid off, a different timer starts to run, right? Maybe you got a severance, maybe you didn't, maybe you're fine financially, maybe you're not, right? Maybe you have insurance, maybe you don't. Like those, there's a lot of different things that you have to begin to consider when you decide to go fractional and you decide to go independent. And so if you're thinking about it and if you're interested in it, today is the best day to start networking and just understanding, is it for you or is it not? Right. Because I think some people, when they get into it, they're like, whoa, I don't want to do that. Like that's actually not fun, and that's part of it. Right. And the only way you can determine that is to like go have those conversations. That's why part of what I do in a network is I meet with people who are considering fractional and we talk about that, talk about some of the challenges, talk about the business development side of it. Right. And so, I think a lot of people, they get laid off and then they find themselves trying to decide what to do. And, it's a longer runway at that point, right? The reason I say that is like for me, I went fractional in June of this year, but I started that process and thinking about that much before June, right? It was probably 12 to 18 months before that. So that'd be my biggest advice. If you're thinking about it, gainfully employed, start to investigate it and see if it's really a good fit, and then think about what's your niche. What do you want to do? Just like the stuff we talked about earlier. Like where do you want to play and what's the value that you're going to bring?
Were you always like this in terms of planning ahead? You sound very uh, direct about it, very intentional about it, right? And some people are like that, some people are not like that. Is this something that, when you were even in college, you were thinking ahead, or was it more like a professional development thing that came about with your experience?
Yeah, I would say it was a professional development thing that came about, right? Like when I graduated high school, my intent was to be an auto mechanic, right? So that's what I was going to go do. And now here I am doing technology, right? But that was my intent. And I had a back injury essentially, right? And so I was like, well, I guess I'm not going to do auto mechanics because that's probably not going to be a good like long-term thing for my body. So I took time off, worked in a steel factory, and then went and got a degree. And I was like, all right, well, I guess I'm going to go down this path of electronics. And so for me, I was not intentional or planful at all, kind of in that beginning. But then as I got a taste for school and started to get into work, right, and started to get exposed to different things, I began to realize um, that I could almost map out a career, right, and that I probably should. Like I should probably actually be more intentional. And so, to your point, over the course of 20 years now, I've become very intentional about the way I think about these things and the way that I plan them out. It doesn't mean I don't have any spontaneity, of course, like I do, but it's also like when it comes to career in your life, I tend to be a little more methodical, right, about where I want to go and what I want to do and how I want to plan. Um, and I think there's this spectrum, right, of people who have that intentionality where you can overanalyze, right? And you can also underanalyze. And I think as I've gotten older, I've gotten a pretty good job of kind of having a healthy balance of that. But I definitely do, just like we talked about earlier, thinking about what I want to do when I'm 65, right? And then backing up to today and saying, like, all right, well, how do you get there? Um, so yeah, for me, it's my wife calls it methodical. I agree. Yep.
And when you think about it, do you think about like, okay, plan A and it's plan A or plan A, or do you think about it in redundancy terms, or like different options, like, okay, this is plan A, but if this doesn't work, plan B, and maybe plan B2. How do you think about it?
Yeah, but definitely not a single plan, right? Just like it's the same way I treat technology. Anytime you set a roadmap for 3 years and you say, all right, we're going to go over here. And if you don't look back at all over those 3 years, right, you never stop, take a temperature check, iterate, see where you're at. You're going to get to your destination and be like, this isn't where I wanted to be, right? 3 years ago, you thought it was, but it's definitely not today. I take that same approach. It's let's take a step forward, learn a little bit about it, understand where we're headed, and let's pivot, right? I get that question a lot about Extravar, the company that I'm working fractionally underneath. And it's, what is that going to be? That's the question to me. And like, I have no idea, right? Like and I think you and I talked about that when we got together too. I don't know. Like, will I have a staff? Maybe. If that becomes apparent that I should do that, then I'll probably go do that, right? So I think that flexibility and just responding, right? Responding to the data around you and the indicators that you're getting, like that's something that I think is really important. So if I had to sum it up, have a North Star, kind of know where you want to go, right? And then constantly just check and see when you need to iterate a little bit, shift a little bit, right? Or if an opportunity presents itself that you can jump on, right? Because if you keep focused on that 3 year down the road mark, you might miss something great. You might miss a chance to talk to Mateo on a podcast. You know what I mean?
I absolutely love it, folks. If you're listening, go back, replay this one. It's a good one to listen to it again. Um, Eric, one final and very random question to you: what do you do when you are not working?
I alluded to it a little bit. I love to bake. So bake breads, bake desserts. We have a thing here. We love to watch the Great British Baking Show. And so what we will do, and it's probably a little silly, but whatever, it's what we like to do. We'll watch it on a Friday and then we'll make a dessert that goes kind of with the theme of the week, right? Because I don't know if you've ever seen the show or not, but they have like cake week, biscuit week, right? Stuff like that. So we'll find something, we'll get a recipe, we'll talk about it, we'll make it, we'll enjoy it during the show. So for me, that's baking is my thing. And it's partly because too, it's tangible, right? I can touch it, I can mold it, I can feel it, I can see it, right? I mean, in technology, that isn't always the case. So I think that's why I anchor so heavily into that physical kind of hobby of mine. Um, Plus, it's a great reason to then go and run because you can't eat all those desserts and just, expect to can't just eat them and expect to not gain any weight.
I love it, man. So I have an inspiration for you. Have you ever done dulce de leche cheesecake?
Cheesecake, no. That is on my list. My daughter's not a huge cheesecake fan, so I need to figure out either when she's not going to be here and I can go make it, or maybe I'll turn her into a cheesecake fan. Who knows? But dulce de leche is delicious, so the idea of having that as a cheesecake would be amazing. Yeah.
Dude, trust me. Mix
Okay.
mix those two worlds together.
All right.
It's my favorite one. So but yeah, I don't know. Let's just give you a challenge.
So all right, if I try it, I'll post about it, and then if it turns out next time you're here, I'll make it again, and we'll sit down together and we'll enjoy it. How about
Yes.
that?
I love it. Yes. Very good. And I'm definitely going back to Minneapolis soon. So
Excellent. Well, I
that's
wouldn't come too soon. It's like -5 today, so
yeah,
don't come here.
relatively soon.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, very good. Eric, this has been an amazing conversation. Thank you for taking the time. I always enjoy talking to you, and I hope we can get to have many more conversations in the future and another episode. And I get to try your dulce de leche cheesecake in the future.
Yeah, I'm excited to try it. Well, thank you, Mateo. Again, I appreciate being on your podcast, having the conversation. It was great to meet you when you were here. And yeah, when you come up and it's not -5, we'll sit down and we'll try it and see if I made it or not.
Deal.
All right.